Hope you're having a good day. We are having a overcast day, but it's not rainy. It's nice temperature. Hope your weather's nice where you are, but I know some of you somewhere probably not. It's just the nature of the beast. Looking at Gideon. Gideon is such an interesting character to me. I hope you can find yourself in these stories that we tell from the Word of God. Some people just think of the Bible as an old, dusty relic of a day gone by. What I find is obviously I believe that the Bible is given to us by God, so it's relevant for people in all ages of all times. But even beyond that, even if you were just to come to this as, an old sacred text by a people long ago, and you read it with an open mind, you would see how much people back then were like we are now. Sure, we have evolved as a society in terms of technology and other things, and some of our cultural practices are different from those days, but at the very heart, people haven't changed. And so in Gideon, I find a lot of interesting human elements in play. We're going to see that today. If you remember where we've left off, Gideon, who came from a small, insignificant family, he himself was an insignificant member of that family. If you were to pick least likely to lead Israel to a great military victory, Gideon's name would have been at the bottom of the page. But that's the way God is. That's the way God works. So I don't want to retell the whole story, but God has now led Gideon to miraculously have a great victory over these people called the Midianites, stubborn-hearted people who rejected God. Gideon leads them to a great victory. The final act is he has the two kings of the Midianites in front of him. And let's pick up the story at that point. Here's the two kings right here, Zeb 1 and Zal 2. Um, Gideon has instructed one of his young sons to come and kill them. He's trying to give his son a place of honor and a way to grow into manhood in a sense, but his son is kind of afraid to do it. So these two kings don't want to die a death at the hands of a scaredy cat, to be honest, to put it plain. These are high-ranking men. They know they're going to die. I, they could have been taunting Gideon, but I think more than that, they call on Gideon to kill them himself because they want to die what they would consider an honorable death. And so says Gideon stepped forward and killed them. And he took the ornaments off their camels' necks. Now, when the Israelites saw all this, they said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian. On the surface, that probably sounds reasonable. We in American history, we have often elected our some of our military leaders who have accomplished great things to be president later on. Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower is a great example of that. Um, and there are others. And if you look in other places in history, this is common. The only problem with it is it's not God's way. I'm not saying it's wrong when it happened in American politics or some politics over here or some politics over there. I'm talking about for the people of God, this would have been wrong. And the reason for that, um, Gideon quickly points this out to them. Hey, Gideon, come be our king. Rule over us, you, your grandson. Have a whole kingly line. Let it run through your family. But Gideon told him this: I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you, because the Lord is supposed to be the one who rules over you. How quickly the people's hearts are moving. Remember, remember that the purpose of a judge was not only to free the people from whatever oppressive nation was bothering them, he was also to lead their hearts back to the Lord. The people don't last long there. The Lord was their ruler. They did not have a king like the people around them, but they wanted to be like the people around them. And Gideon correctly says to them, no, the Lord will rule over you. Now, if Gideon had stopped right there, this would have been a pretty good story to tell. But from this point on, things start to go off the rails. They get off track because I think the text is it's a funny story because it gives us certain facts, but it doesn't fill in the gaps of why. I think part of what we're about to see is simply after a great victory, often we're very susceptible. Like when we have a spiritual high, we're usually very susceptible to a spiritual low right after. Our emotions can come crashing down, or we can be tempted unusually strongly after some kind of a spiritual high or a spiritual victory in our lives. I don't know if that's what's going on. I don't know if it's just pride welling up, but look at what Gideon does next. I'm going to warn you, I forgot to turn my timer on, so I have no idea how long we've gone. I don't have any idea how long this is going to be. It's going to be as long as it's going to be. I, in verse 24, I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder. So plunder is simply when you conquered another people, you took stuff from them, usually the valuable stuff. In the case of the Midianites, they were robbing Israel of all of their food. In this case, the army of Israel took the gold and silver from the people that they had just conquered. It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. So the people they conquered, this is a phrase that references the Midianites, they wore a lot of jewelry. Some cultures wear more jewelry than others. Apparently, this is suggesting they wore more jewelry. So the Israelites took it. So they answered, we'll be glad to give you this jewelry. So they spread out a garment, and each of them threw a ring from his plunder onto it. And the weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian or the chains that were around the camels' necks. Those things are going to come into play in a later story, not today. These gold rings probably weigh about 45 pounds. This is no small, insignificant amount of gold. This is a lot of gold. So what does Gideon do with this gold? It says Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, which is his hometown. Now, we're going to come back to that. What is an ephod? Well, there's not a lot of agreement on it, but we do know from earlier texts that the high priest wore something called an ephod. It was like an apron that he wore around his waist. It was very ornamental. It was very valuable, and it was meant to signify that the high priest was special among all the other priests. Not special in and of himself, but the role that he filled was a special role. It was only the high priest that could go in once a year and offer the great sacrifice on behalf of the people for the forgiveness of sins. It was a very special role. Kind of the next time we hear ephods being mentioned is right here. Gideon goes and makes one. It doesn't tell us exactly why he made it, uh, but it does say that he set it up in a building in his town, and people began to worship there. The problem is people were ultimately meant to worship over in Jerusalem. And the bigger problem is that he is not a Levite. Levites were in charge of all of those kinds of things. So all the priests came from the tribe of Levi. He comes from a different tribe. It wasn't their place to try to regulate or to promote, in a sense, worship, in the sense of leading the people in worship. So what Gideon had in mind, I think Gideon had in mind, he wanted this thing which would have been like what the high priest wore to remind the people that it was God that provided the victory, and don't ever forget it. That's my kind-hearted interpretation of Gideon's motives, but we don't know what his motives were. But that's what I'm guessing went on. Unfortunately, human nature being human nature, it will eventually corrupt everything. It doesn't matter what we have, we eventually corrupt it. Look at what happens. So Gideon made the gold into an ephod and he placed it in his hometown, and all of Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping, not worshiping there, worshiping it. Instead of this symbol turning the people's hearts to God, the people made it into an idol. And ultimately, it became a snare to Gideon and his own family. Now, if you're familiar with your Old Testament, this might remind you of another story earlier. The story of Aaron when Moses was up on the mountain getting the Ten Commandments from God, and Aaron to occupy the people, gather together gold, and he made a golden calf. And then the people worshiped not what the golden calf was representing in Aaron's mind. They worshiped the golden calf as if it was God. There's a lot of similarities. The same thing is happening here. But the point is that people had lost track of the fact that it was the Lord that was supposed to be their ruler. And they were looking for all kinds of things except for submitting themselves to our Heavenly Father to be the ruler. We struggle with the same thing at times in our lives. We have lots of things that come in and that distract us. We have lots of things in our lives that ultimately can become idols if you let it. It ultimately led Gideon astray. It, he probably meant well, but it led all of the people astray because ultimately it played into the worst part of who they were, with a people whose heart wandered from the Lord so easily. So, a great story starts off so well, and it's going to end in just chaos. We're going to come back and look a little bit of more of the story on Friday, Lord willing. But this is a cautionary tale about keeping your heart right before the Lord. And in any given day and any given moment, ultimately, it is the Lord who is your king and my king. That's my word for today. I hope that encourages your heart. And I'm looking forward to seeing how long this was because, again, I didn't set my timer. I have no idea. But I hope you have a good couple days and Lord willing, see you on Friday.